looking at this question. Do authors gain an advantage by publishing gold open access? And we're going to do that by digging into some of the data that's emerging from the Pearce's publishing operation, and thinking particularly about scholarly impact and usage and citation and things like that. Next slide, please. By way of context, open access is really growing as a proportion of what we publish on the journal side of our operations at CUP. So back in 2017, roughly 7% of our research article publishing was open access. In 2022, at least as of May, the number is now 42%. So we are the trend is substantially upward, and we have the chance potentially of crossing over the 50% boundary and becoming majority open access within the next year. And one of the reasons that we're really pleased to see this trajectory is what we're seeing from our data about the advantage that this open access publishing is bringing these authors. Next slide. So this first chart around usage looks at a very macro high level view of our usage on our platform, Cambridge Core. It's using a data set of roughly 20,000 research articles that the Pearce published in 2020. And it's looking at the usage that they accumulated over the first 12 months after their publication. The yellow line represents the average for an OA article on our platform, an open access article, and the blue line represents non-open access articles, the same measure. And whether you look at mean or median, which is the difference between the solid and the dotted lines here, both are showing a roughly 5% or five times increase for open access articles relative to non-OA articles. So a significant advantage that is evident immediately in the first month and is prolonged through the full 12-month period. If we dig down to subject level on the next slide, we see that there is some variation across different subjects, but still nevertheless in every subject that we're publishing in, there is a notable advantage in terms of usage for open access articles. What you're seeing here is for each subject there are two bars, a yellow one and a grey one. The yellow bar represents the proportion of articles published in that subject that were open access back in 2020. And the grey bar represents the proportion of usage within that data set, looking at 12 months worth of usage that was attributable to those articles. So the difference between the height of those two bars in each subject represents the degree to which open access articles are outperforming non-OA articles in that particular subject area. And they're arranged from left to right, with left being the most significant difference and right being the least. There's lots that could be said about this chart, but the headline really is that in every subject, there is a notable advantage for open access articles. And there's no particular difference here between science, technology, medicine journals on one hand and humanities and social science journals on the other. Next slide, please. This final set of charts for usage is looking to extend the time frame. So the last two charts that we've looked at are only looking at a 12-month usage period, usage window, and that's not very long. It's very difficult when you're doing this kind of macro analysis to extend that time frame very much at the moment, because we simply haven't been publishing open access in substantial volumes for long enough. And so that data will emerge over time. What we can do now is drill down a little bit in order to extend the window, and that's what we're doing here. So each chart here represents a specific issue of a journal that was published back in 2017 and which carried some open access content and some non-OA content. The yellow line represents the accumulation of usage over 4 years for the OA content, and the blue represents the same for the non-OA content in that issue. So in each case, these are very small sample sizes. Sometimes it's just 10 or 15 articles that we're looking at here, but the advantage of it is that it allows us to to look over a longer time frame, because this is some of the earliest open access publishing that we were doing. And it also means that you're absolutely comparing like for like. These are the same article types in the same journals, in the very same issues, published more or less at the same time. And we can repeat that over and over again for lots and lots of different issues. And we can see the patterns that emerge. And there are two patterns that very strongly emerge here. One is that open access articles consistently outperform their non-OA counterparts in the issues. And the second is that OA advantage is extended over time. The gap between the blue and the yellow lines increases over time, which suggests that the advantage is not just a short-term thing within the first year, but is prolonged at least over 4 years. And there's no reason to assume from this data that wouldn't continue beyond 4 years as well. So relatively conclusive evidence that there is a significant usage advantage for open access articles. Next slide, please. This is the last set of charts. We're looking at history journals, and this is just to show that if you do the same for our political science journals, you get the same results. And if we go to the next slide, if we do the same for life sciences, we get the same results. More or less, wherever we do this across our program, we get charts that look very similar to this. Right, next slide. Moving on to citations, the evidence base for a citation advantage is less strong than the base for a usage advantage, but we have at least some early evidence to show a citation advantage. Again, this is based on a 2020 data set of 20,000 articles. The numbers that we're working with citations is obviously much smaller than usage numbers. And also a 2-year citation window is a very short window, especially for our humanities and social science journals. So we need to gather more data over time. But from the data that we have already, we are seeing a citation advantage emerging for both STM and OA journals. So what you're seeing here is a box plot that is showing the citation count for every one of those 20,000 articles and putting them into quartiles. And what this shows is that the first 2 quartiles, so the lower 50% of citation count amongst those articles, there isn't a particular advantage of being OA evident in the data. Non-OA articles and OA articles are generally receiving the same number of citations within those quartiles. But once you move into the 3rd and 4th quartiles, you do see a distinct citation advantage for both STM and HSS journals. So what this is showing is that articles that receive below average citations for their subject area don't necessarily get a big advantage from publishing OA, but as soon as articles do begin accumulating citations, those citations tend towards multiplying more quickly if the article is published open access. So not conclusive evidence, but interesting early evidence of a citation advantage across both STM and HSS. If we drill down to subject level on the next slide, again, we're seeing variation across the subjects, but in most cases, we are seeing some kind of advantage for open access articles in terms of citation within this 2-year window. There is on this chart a marked advantage, particularly for science, technology, medicine journals. So you see arrayed on the left here, medicine, earth and atmospheric sciences, neuroscience, psychology and psychiatry, plant sciences, all showing a distinct advantage in terms of citation. There is less of a showing here on the left-hand side of this chart for humanities and social science journals, although politics and international relations is something of an exception there. Partly, we think this is simply because we're looking at this 2-year citation window, and because of the pace of citations in STM journals is faster, we would expect an OA advantage to manifest in the data more quickly. And so it will be some years yet before we see whether the same advantages manifest in the humanities and social sciences, although there is the beginning of evidence with the small advantages that we're seeing in this chart that may well be the case in the future. So again, not conclusive evidence, but early evidence of a citation advantage across a broad range subjects. Next slide, please. Finally, non-academic citation. This is altmetric data, and it's looking at a data set covering our article publishing output in 2021 this time. And across that data set, we're seeing that open access articles on average received 82% more mentions on social media. They were 200% more likely to be referenced in news media or on blogs, and they were 9% more likely to be referenced in policy papers too. Next slide, please. So all of this evidence, when you put it together, it amounts to a relatively strong case for the advantage to authors of publishing open access. And the data that we're seeing is corroborating data that we're seeing in external research too. So that advantage is there. It's applicable across different disciplines in the humanities and social sciences as much as in science, technology, and medicine. In terms of usage specifically, it's not just a marginal advantage, it is a substantial advantage, and it's prolonged over time. And we're beginning to see that evidence of that usage advantage, that increased usage, turning into material gains in terms of scholarly impact. So increased citation, increased discussion, increased debate, increased policy impact, broader audiences. Next slide, please. So at the Press, as we think about open access and we think about transitioning our portfolio to increasingly publish open access material, we have a lot of different things to juggle, and we have a lot of stakeholders to work with. And so we have a lot of conversations with funders and librarians and governments and learned societies about open access policy. But always looming very large in our thinking is the author experience and the impact on our authors of publishing open access, and the kind of evidence that I've just talked through about the advantage that our authors are gaining from it. And that is encouraging us to really push to develop an equitable and sustainable transition to open access and increase the amount of open access publishing that we are doing. Critical to that, though, is making sure that it's available to the broadest possible spectrum of authors. And ultimately, we want to be in a position to extend this advantage to every author. If we move to the next slide. Our key tool in achieving that, in making OA work for all authors instead of a small subset, are these open access institutional agreements. These are agreements that we form with academic institutions that allow their faculty to publish open access in our journals without paying an article publishing charge. And they have had a really transformative impact on our OA publishing over the last few years. So back in 2019, which isn't that long ago, almost all of our open access publishing was limited to a small privileged group of academics who had access to grant funding that could pay for article publishing charges. The picture now is really very different in 2022. So upwards of 80% of our open access publishing is not through the payment of article publishing charges, but is through these OA institutional agreements. And they have brought a much broader spectrum of authors into open access funding at lots of different career stages, working in different disciplines. We have agreements with institutions of lots of different sizes and types. A really broad spectrum of institutional agreements, over 2,000 across the world in 50 countries. To the extent that it's possible for me to say with some confidence that a significant proportion of you people listening in the audience today will have access to our open access publishing through one of these institutional agreements. Of course, we won't ever be able to cover everybody through one of these agreements for a variety of different reasons. And amongst that group that's not covered, many of them will not have access to article publishing charge funding either. And so for that reason, we're also developing a robust waiver policy to be able to support and bring in those unfunded authors. We are really very much concerned about being open for business for every author, regardless of their funding context, and we want to bring this OA advantage to them. We need to make all of this much easier. we're in the midst of a really major transformation in this sector. Open access is new and it's complicated, and it involves lots of different policies and options that are moving at different paces in different places. And it's easy for authors to end up with a lot of questions about this. Am I eligible for the Press's waiver scheme? Does my institution have an agreement with Cambridge to publish open access? Will my funder pay an APC to Cambridge to publish open access? And so we're very cognizant of that problem, and we are working very hard to try and improve the way that we communicate with authors, and that we communicate open access policy and help people very quickly establish what options they have available to them. And this is partly actually what putting together webinars like this is all about. But the headline really is that through one of these means, through APC payment, through an OA institutional agreement, or through our waiver policy, there should at this point be no author who is concerned about submitting to our open access journals. We are open for business for all authors who meet the peer review standard, and we would really encourage you to submit your research to those journals and gain the OA advantage that we've been discussing.